So we're going to get into sculpting. In Cinema 4D, there's a couple of adjustments that we're going to make with your viewer. We're going to go into a different template. But sculpting can be thought of as basically taking a mesh. It's kind of like a virtual balloon that has a starting point, a certain shape, and you're going in and adding a bunch of textures and features to that balloon, if you will. Modeling, which is what we did with the spaceships, you're taking a shape or some shapes and assembling those and adjusting those to make it look like a specific object. With sculpting, we're adding textures and features to that object. So it's like the next step after you model in computer graphics. This is the example that I used last year. I started with what's called a base mesh here, and then eventually arrived to a point that looked like Yoda, and I'm pretty proud of this. I 3D printed it. It's up on the table up here next to me. There's a student work printed up there as well. We will be assembling these with a base and adding paint to them, and we can get a pretty high level model with what you guys produce. There is a process, and it's not easy. It's kind of time consuming, but what I want you to do first is to kind of absorb what I'm showing you, and then we're going to apply those concepts to a couple different shapes. So we're not just making one project. You're going to be working in sculpting for a set amount of time. We're going to work on this up to Christmas break and even after you get back. Okay, so it's quite a long process. So here's what we're going to do. Let me cancel out of this and get into it. So when you open up Cinema 4D, you start with a layout called Startup. For sculpting, there's a drop-down menu here when you click Startup, and we're going to go down to Sculpting. It's right here. When you click that button, you'll see a different template show up, a different layout. It still has your viewport. All of your different buttons for zooming in and moving are all up here still. You can go into a split screen if you want to see an overhead view. You still have all of that at your disposal. But there are all kinds of new tools that pop up in this area. For our first project, we're going to start with what's called a base mesh. It's like a balloon in the shape of a head. And there's a bunch of base meshes in here that you can experiment with. And I encourage you to do that. You'll be given credit for what you turn in for the first model, even if it doesn't look good. We'll have a finished product that's supposed to be your best work, and that one's going to be graded with the department rubric, and I'll talk about that here in a second. So you're going to be given a lot of time to work with these tools and turn out a product or products that will go together as like a suite or a bunch of objects that you'll be grading. So we're not just taking one image or one object and grading it. You're going to be graded on the work that you do with this. And I'll explain that a little bit more in detail here in a second. So we're in Sculpting Layout. Over here are tabs that can show objects, your layers that you sculpt with, so on and so forth. For animation, different takes. Right here is a tab called Content Browser. This Content Browser has a bunch of preloaded materials, shapes, scenes, lighting, so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff in here. We're going to be working with what's called presets. What I would suggest doing is going up here in the upper right-hand corner and clicking this little search tool. And you're going to type in base mesh. When I do that and hit return, you'll see a folder here with base meshes in it. When I click that, you'll be able to see the types of base meshes we start with. With your first couple of projects, we started with what are called primitives. There are cubes, spheres, capsules, so on and so forth. These are basically the same thing. They just have some different shapes. It's as if the balloon was shaped similar to, in this case, a generic head. I suggest starting with this one because that's probably what you'll use for your character design that I'll talk about later. When you double click that, it will load directly into this screen. Now, I do not want you to make it larger. Do not scale it. We want to keep it small like this. But if I hit O on my keyboard, O for object, it will zoom in for you. We want to keep it this size because when I print it, I want it to have a high resolution. I want it to look good. So we hit O on the keyboard, leave it the default size. A couple other things we need to do to get set up before we start sculpting. Right here's a drop-down menu called Display. When I click that, I'm on Guard Shading. That basically is saying here, this is what this mesh would look like if it was 3D printed. You can add material to it, do whatever you want with it. But we're going to go down to that next selection called Guard Shading Lines. When I click that, you can see the geometry or the polygons that are on this mesh that I can go in and start adjusting. Now, there's only so many polygons represented here. Let's say there's 400. When I click my model, I can go up here to subdivide, and I can see that, okay, I was a little off. There's 558 little sections that I can adjust. And I could probably get a decent model with that, a decent sculpture, but I want to add some more geometry to this to make it more detailed. And be very careful when you subdivide with how many subdivisions you make. I'm going to click this button a couple of times, and right now I'm right around 8,000. Right here I'm at 35,000. I wouldn't go much more than tens of thousands. So 35,000 is a lot of little polygons that I can stretch and pull and inflate and deflate. That's pretty good. If you keep increasing it, you're going to get into the millions, and this program is going to start bogging down, and it's going to freeze. So don't go any more than, say, 35, maybe 50,000 polygons. You don't need any more for high resolution. Okay? If you need to decrease your polygons, you just hit the decrease button. I can go back down to as many as I want. But for my sculpture, I'm going to stay at right around 35,000. So now I'm ready to start messing around with some of these tools. In model mode, with these tools, if you hover over top of them, the program will give you a shorthand of what they do. This is pull. It allows you to pull or push the surface. This is grab. It allows you to grab the surface and stretch it or pull it out from a surface. I'm going to click on that one for this demonstration. I'm going to go onto my model, I'm going to click, and I'm going to pull some polygons out. So all these tools do different things. That pull tool, or that grab tool, just basically allowed me to grab those polys and stretch them out. And I can grab them and I can push them back. I can start manipulating this any way I want. This is how I got Yoda's ears. Holding Option on your keyboard allows you to move around or pan around your model. I would suggest doing that while you're modeling. You go inside of it, you can see inside of the balloon, you can go to the back of it. You need to be able to navigate. An Option is a nice shortcut. You can still use these tools up here, move it around. By the way, if you lose it, it gets off into space. Remember, the shortcut is O for object. It'll bring it right back to the center. So I've got that grab tool that I use. Let's say that I don't like my ear. I can step back through my history, or I can go down here and I can use my erase tool. If I click erase, I can go into that and I can erase that adjustment that I made back to the base mesh. And again, all of these tools do different things, and I'm going to encourage you to use all of them, at least for this first one. You may end up with a model that looks absolutely hideous. You're going to turn that hideous model in as a record of what you've done with these tools. And you'll be assigned a grade for it, which should be 100% as long as you use them all. Then we'll make another model that you're going to select imagery from an online source, perhaps Yoda or whatever character you want to make. We're going to sculpt that. I'm going to scan each of you. We're going to scan you from the shoulders up. We're going to drop you into Cinema 4D, and we're going to either turn you into a superhero or adjust you in a certain way, shape, or form. So there's 3 different models that you're going to be working with within the next 3 weeks or so, and after we get back from break. But back to this stuff. The smooth tool, actually let me grab another spot. So I'm going to grab this, bump that out. The smooth tool, again, if you hover over it, says smooth out the surface by averaging the position of vertices. I can go over top of this area and I can start to smooth it out if it's too popped out. Wax is awesome. Wax is like taking a candle and melting wax on top of your model. It allows you to build up surface area, and then you can go in and adjust that surface area any way you want. I use that a lot with my Yoda. to get the bumps on top of his head. I also use this knife tool. The knife tool allows you to make lines or cuts in your mesh. That's how I got the lines down the top of Yoda's head. Pinch tool does what you think it does. It grabs polys and pinches them together if you need to refine an area. The flatten tool allows you to go back in and flatten those down perhaps if you need to. Inflate does just like what you think. As you click over top of it, it blows the balloon up a little bit. So, Berkey, how do you adjust the size of your brush? That yellow target right there, that's your brush. We can make it larger or smaller, right down here. Every one of these tools, you can go down the attributes manager for it, and you can turn up the size, the pressure, so that they work faster or slower. And I encourage you folks, once you get the general shape of what you're modeling or sculpting down, to really zoom in. My Yoda, that I'm very proud of, turned out awesome, I think, because I zoomed way in and I added a ton of detail by zooming in and adjusting textures on Yoda's head. Let's say that you're working with the eyes here, and you think those eyes are perfect, but you want to add some texture around those eyes. This is a mask. A mask allows you to go in and block out an area so that it's not affected by your brushes. So let's use the wax. So I can build up wax around that eye, and it won't be affected at all because I just masked it out. I can invert the mask with a click of a button. None of this stuff's affected by my tools, just the stuff that's not dark, it's not highlighted. All of these tools I want you to use, every single one, at least with this first mesh. Play, have fun. It's like a virtual sandbox. Play with it. Whatever you come up with, even if it looks like garbage to you, save it, and I'm going to have you turn that in. Berkey, how long am I expected to do this? At least a class period or two, just using the tools, getting used to them. So, let me step back through this mask. Couple other things that will help you while you're messing with this. Let's go back to this grab tool, and I talked about my Yoda in great detail, because again, I'm proud of him. Some things that can help you. Right down here in the attributes manager is symmetry. Let's say I want my left side to look like the right side, but I don't want to do it twice, and I want it to be the same. I can click symmetry, and I can go down to this x-axis with YZ in parentheses. And notice when I start hovering over an area like this temple, I can see a little dot on the other side of the head. That's saying that, hey, if I pull this side, the other side's going to get pulled too. It can save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. Every one of these tools has the ability to go into symmetry. If I want the knife tool to start cutting on one side of it, but I want it to cut on the other side as well, right down here, the x-axis, you can see that dot show up, and I can model both sides the same and save myself a ton of time. If you want to undo it, you just uncheck it, and you can work with one side, and you can keep going back and forth. You can link all of these as well. Right here's link symmetry. If you want all of the tools to have symmetry as you use them, feel free to do that as well. What are we going to do with these when we're finished? Again, you'll turn your base mesh in with your first and last name and practice. Export as an STL. I'm not going to print that one unless you want it printed. Just ask me if you do want it printed. And then when we get into the quote-unquote good one, I'm going to show you how we're going to set that up. You're going to jump online, search whatever it is you might want to make. We're going to get different views of it, different angles. For instance, like my Yoda, I went in and I found some pictures online of the side of Yoda, and I know these are different versions of him. This is probably my favorite version of him. Just to get an idea of what this thing needs to look like, and we're going to refer to those images to create our model. If while you're experimenting, you want to try a tool but you like what you've got, you can make a copy of your model just by holding Command and clicking on it and dragging it out. Feel free to make copies and adjust things in any way, shape, or form that you want. questions on messing around with base meshes and sculpting?